state their name and the district they represent. So let's start over with Jackie.
I'm Jackie Mosqueda Jones. I represent District 279 Osseo Area Schools.
I'm Heidi Marty. I represent West Tonka Public Schools.
Ann Casey, proudly representing St. Louis Park.
I am Regina Neville, and I represent Edina Public Schools.
Andrea Keene, Wayzata.
Sam Sant, Robbinsville, 281.
Shannon Andreessen, representing Hopkins Public Schools.
Evening, Michelle Kuntz, representing Orono Public Schools.
Welcome, board members, and I'd like to welcome all of our staff and people who are joining us remotely on Google Meet. Glad to have everyone here. I'm going to walk through this afternoon's agenda. We'll have audience opportunity to speak, followed by approval of the consent agenda. The next item on the agenda is board chair report regarding COVID-19 safety guidelines and a resolution for the 2021-22 school year. And then we will wrap up our afternoon with just once around the table and general announcements for the upcoming school year. Are there any additions to the agenda? I move that we accept the agenda as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Sam Sant. And we're back. We don't need the roll call vote anymore. So all those in favor of approval of the agenda, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Juanita, is there anyone who would like to address the board this afternoon?
No, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. We'll move on for approval of the consent agenda. Is there anything on the consent agenda anyone would like removed for separate consideration? Hearing none, is there a motion to accept the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
Moved by member Ann Casey, second.
Jackie Mosqueda Jones.
Seconded by Jackie Mosqueda Jones. All those in favor of approval of the consent agenda, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. And at this time, we're going to move on to 9.2.1.1, the board chair report with COVID-19 safety guidelines and resolution for the 2021-22 school year. I'm going to ask for a motion to bring this resolution to the table. I'm going to read the resolution out loud. Sandy will then give a brief overview and introduction, and then I'll welcome Jake Horish to give a presentation with some more background about the resolution. Sandy will follow with some additional information, and then at that time we'll have an opportunity for questions and answers, and we will allow ample opportunity for that. I know that this is an issue topic that all of our districts are addressing, and we're going to do the same. So is there a motion to bring item 9.2.1.1 to the table?
I so move.
Moved by member Andrea Keene. Is there a second? Seconded by Michelle Kuntz. And at this time, we will have discussion. I'm going to read the resolution, and that will be followed by discussion. This is a resolution describing policies to be adopted regarding fiscal year 22 back-to-school safety measures. Whereas on March 11th, 2020, the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 novel coronavirus a pandemic. Whereas the Delta variant of the coronavirus is highly contagious, much more so than the original strain of COVID-19, which has already killed more than 600,000 people in the United States. And this variant is widespread in the United States at this time. Whereas District 287 serves some of the most vulnerable and medically fragile students in the state, some of whom are not able to be vaccinated for medical reasons. Whereas children under 12 years of age are not eligible for a vaccine at this time, and the CDC reports that less than a third of the 12 to 17-year-olds have been vaccinated. Whereas the Mayo Clinic, in an article this week, said that the Delta variant is so contagious that kids who aren't vaccinated stand a good chance to contract COVID-19. Dr. Rayapoksky, a pediatric infectious disease physician, said, you're really making the choice between getting vaccinated or getting COVID-19. This Delta variant is just that contagious. Whereas the board has balanced various public policy objectives in deciding what policy should be adopted and the substance of those policies. And whereas the safety of students and staff is central to these decisions and the policies to be adopted. Be it resolved by the School Board of Intermediate District 287, State of Minnesota, as follows. The board will consider the emergency adoption of the following policies at its regular meeting on August 26, 2021. 1, face covering policy. The face covering policy would require students, staff, and visitors to wear a face covering in any District 287 building, regardless of vaccination status. 2, proof of vaccination or negative test. This policy would require District 287 staff to provide proof of vaccination or participate in weekly COVID-19 testing. Note that we strongly recommend that students 12 years and older get the COVID-19 vaccination. However, it will not be required to attend school. 3, quarantine policy. The policy on quarantines would provide differentiated guidance for vaccinated and unvaccinated individuals if there is a positive case of COVID-19 or potential exposure as a close contact. The motion for the adoption of the foregoing resolution was duly seconded by member, and we'll conclude from there when it's time to take action. At this time, I'd invite Superintendent Sandy Lewandowski to give us an overview of the resolution.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. Welcome here this afternoon. As Chair Neville mentioned, I'm sure that many of you are having the discussions in your communities, in your school district, about the rising rates that we're seeing due to the Delta variant. This afternoon, I'm bringing you a resolution for your consideration that is very conservative, as the actual resolution language indicates, because of the very vulnerable population of students that we serve and our intent to keep our district buildings as safe as possible for the upcoming school year. Last year, as you know, was a very disrupted kind of school year for everyone, and we want to do everything we can to keep this school year one that we can continue to welcome students into our learning environments throughout the year. But I think beyond that, we know that the media is flooded with visual scenes of what's happening in other parts of the country as the Delta variant takes hold. And as the leader of the district, and I know all of you, we do not want to see anyone in an ICU, whether it's student, family members, or staff. And frankly, I do not want to look back at a certain point and say we could have done something more protective of our collective communities. And it's for that reason that, as the resolution states, I'm recommending that masks be worn in all of our school properties, as well as staff, students as able, and visitors. Even probably more conservative is that this recommendation, if approved, would require all staff to get and show a vaccine or be tested weekly and show a verification of that positive test. The quarantine item is still one that we have evolving information from the Department of Health, and we expect that there will be continued information to give us more clarity on that in the coming days. I think if approved by the board, the intent of this resolution is that it will signal our collective communities that the board intends to develop and approve specific policies around these three areas. we would use the next 2 weeks to bring specificity to these 3 actions for your review and actions on August 26th. I'll stop right there. I think that it might be prudent to say that this is a responsible recommendation. There might be others in our communities that would argue otherwise, but from my vantage point, knowing the district as I do, I think it's a responsible decision for the board to consider. I want to give you some background information, and we've asked Jake Horish, to our health and safety manager, who probably knows more about this, the specifics of this, than any of us in this room, because he's been living it for the last 1.5 years and has worked diligently to bring you an updated review of the current situation as we see it. But I also want to thank Jake publicly. It's because of him that we had as much success last year as we did. He has been excellent in guiding us from a health and safety standpoint. Appreciate his contributions. So Jake, I'm going to turn it over to you to give the board an overview of where we're at right now.
Well, thank you, Sandy. Thank you, Madam Chair Neville, members of the board. Wait, I had to pull it up here. A lot of what I'm sharing here is going to be a repeat of the information that was just shared. We do have a little bit more detail here, but just on a high level, what do we know right now? I'm sure you're about as excited to hear about all this as I am to give it to you after 1.5 years, coming up on 2 years of COVID, right? But that variant up there on the screen, the Delta variant, has a lot of health professionals really worried. Just to reiterate, the Delta variant is more contagious. We know that. Actually, 90% of all COVID cases globally are the Delta variant. So they've really taken over all the other variants. The data suggests around the Delta variant that it will cause more severe illness than the previous strands than on an unvaccinated person. So I know it says might, but this was created a couple days ago and it's changed, right? So the data has improved that. Unvaccinated people remain the greatest concern. That is still the #1 thing, and that's why vaccinations is such a large push for that. And fully vaccinated people with the Delta variant breakthrough infections can spread the virus to others. So in other words, just because someone is fully vaccinated does not mean they cannot catch it, and they can spread it to others. So that's still a huge concern. However, being fully vaccinated makes the symptoms of the illness less severe, less hospitalized, and worst case scenario, death. So those numbers are extremely low if you're fully vaccinated. All the information that we're pulling is from the World Health Organization. The Center of Disease Control and Prevention pulls from the World Health Organization, MDH, Minnesota Department of Health pulls from the CDC, and our local partners do the same. All these experts are reflecting this data and pushing our recommendations for schools. Just to share some case rates, I know it's kind of little. I don't know if Chad can blow that up at all. However, all I really wanted to do here, this is public access, anyone can go view it. This is Hennepin County data per city. And it comes out every 2 weeks. There's a 2-week delay on this data. However, over the past 4 to 6 weeks, the case rates have doubled or tripled in every city. There's only one city that dropped this week, which is Rogers. Otherwise, there's a double or triple increase rate. I mean, there's some cities already up to 20 cases per 10,000 people, which is very concerning. The case rate we want to be under is 10 per 10,000. That's not as bad as where it has gone, and it's continuing to go up. And again, there's a 2-week delay. So if you think about it, if it's doubling, right now, as of today, it could be right around the 40, 50, and we all know what that, I mean, they were shutting schools down at 50 last year, so it's very concerning. More of what we know right now, again, this is kind of this is the first recommendation of the face coverings based on CDC, MDH, World Health Organization. School guidance is for face coverings for all vaccinated or not indoors. The plan would be, if approved, to implement this on Monday, August 30th, for all students, staff, visitors, contractors, anybody that's in our 287 facility, ultimately. And then until that point, just strongly recommend it for those, especially unvaccinated. The one thing that's still going to apply is the exemptions. So I'm sure you're all well aware, there's a multitude of exemptions for why you don't have to wear a mask. Those still apply. I have one listed there. The students with an IEP who are not able to wear a mask will still be exempted in going through the IEP process. That's one of many. So just know that. And then the district will be providing surgical masks for all staff, so staff don't have to pay for a cost for this face covering mandate. They have to go through. The second recommendation is testing the vaccinations. Again, based on approval, we would request testing to be required for anyone that is not fully vaccinated nor wants to show proof of vaccination. It would be a choice situation, but then in that case, we'd want them to test weekly to prove that they're negative before coming into the school. The ultimate goal is to try to keep COVID out of your facilities and not coming in, because we already know it's in the communities. As of Wednesday, just factual information, maybe you're all aware of it, probably are. As of yesterday, the state employees are following this exact mandate. The logistics of this, there's a lot behind it. I'm sure all your schools are going through it. MDH has not released the testing options as of yet. We have researched some of our own, but we're well aware that the logistic and part still needs to take place over the next week or two. Last recommendation would be monitoring and excluding for illness. So as most districts are aware, all schools really followed the Minnesota Department of Health flow chart last year. So depending on the situation, you would go through and your nurses would determine the time frame you needed to be out, who needed to be out. So they're updating that guidance as we speak, because there's a lot more around vaccinations and who is considered a close contact. And now if you're fully masked in a classroom, students wouldn't be considered a close contact. There's just a lot around that. So right now we're working on, again, the logistics of this and waiting for some more updated guidance from the government. Some of the other things that we are going to move forward with that we had in place for last year was physical distancing and cohorting. So again, these are still recommendations for this school year. And this is something that isn't going to be extremely new to our staff because we implemented them last year. So again, this is the number one piece that we have moving forward is the physical distancing and cohorting. And the cohorting is really just trying to keep the kids together as much as possible so they don't interact with a bunch of different groups and ultimately become a close contact. This is really going to be important for the 11 and younger because none of them are able to get the vaccine, where we know an entire elementary school could be a higher risk if you're moving different classrooms and kids are switching in between classrooms. So that's going to be important for them. The 12 and older, it's still important, but not as important because there's a percentage, according to the state, 40% of these kids are vaccinated, which will help any outbreak from occurring in your school. The next 5 bullet points down are from our preparedness plan last year. All schools had to come up with a preparedness plan. You had to touch on certain areas. These are areas where you just decided to do a layer approach and move these forward into this school year. So the cleaning, disinfecting will be the same. It'll be ultimately any disinfectant in all classrooms, and we'll have them stationed around the building. We're going to do electrostatic sprayers twice a week, and then obviously high touch point areas throughout the week and day. Closures will be if an outbreak were to happen. Really, that's what it comes down to. If an outbreak happens where it would be super impactful, the Department of Health will work with your school to identify what type of closure would need to happen. And then material handling. I just probably don't want to grab this and share it with Chad here. Ultimately, you want to make sure all your items are sanitized and clean before giving them to somebody else, or everybody else has their own materials. So that's part of the materials handling. The ventilation systems were ultimately turned up is to provide as much airflow into the schools as possible. That's going to continue on to this year. That was a great deterrent and safety layer for all schools last year. It was proven. We want to move forward with that. And then the bottom 3 are protecting vulnerable populations, delivering direct student services. So ultimately that bullet point, the delivering direct student services, is the PPE for special ed. Who needs to wear it, what they need to wear. The biggest part is it really highlights your nurses. And if they have a student with symptoms and they have to get moved to an isolation room, what PPE really do they need to wear to protect themselves? So that'll be moving forward. And then the last piece is communications and training, practices and protocols would all stay in place, including the training for PPE if the mask mandate goes through. The why of all these safety layers is over the past year and a half, I've worked with MDH, Hennepin Health, and we've really been praised for the number of cases that we had within our district last year, which were under 100. They were 90, and that's student and staff related. That's confirmed cases that were infectious in our building. Around 90, and half were students and half were split, maybe give or take a few, which again is just extremely highlighted, and the Department of Health again has praised us for that. So my understanding from the best practices is to have a layered approach, right? Masking is foremost probably one of the best safety layers you can implement at your schools, but then all these other ones are layering on top of it. So the best way to prevent COVID from coming in, and or if it does come in, from spreading from student to staff or staff to student, is to provide all these safety layers out for the district. And then of course, when we created this, a lot of the logistics still needs to take place. And once we do that, that would obviously be shared out to the district community.
Thank you, Jake. I appreciate it. Not just this presentation, but again, your work over the last year and a half. And thank you in advance for this year and the work that's going to be needed. All of you are aware, I know, that there is currently no executive orders in place like there was last year. No safe learning plan kind of guidelines that school districts were needing to follow. Therefore, each and every school district is figuring out their own trajectory on this. And I know you will be in it in your own member districts as well. I do want to acknowledge, though, that in the last 24 hours, the two largest national teachers unions are now supporting vaccine mandates. I think that's significant. And I think you will hear other media kind of things like this, just like you're hearing now several public entities like the state government employee guidelines that were put out by Governor Walz yesterday, as well as private companies. And I think it's significant that those public and private entities deal with adults. And yet we have some, again, of the most vulnerable children in the county, if not the state. And I think that we need to pay attention to that and do right by our students and our families. We do know, but after meeting with our back to school committee that includes our two unions, 2209 and 284 yesterday, there will be questions, rightfully so. And our intent, and I pledge this, is that we'll try to get the answers that to the questions that are being asked. We also will do whatever we need to do and can do to support our staff in this effort and our families. And you probably will have questions about that in terms of testing and vaccinations. And Jake is already trying to figure out the best possible system that can support those staff and the families in this particular area of testing and vaccination. But I think it's fair to acknowledge this is a significant endeavor. There will be a lot of details that are going to need to be worked on in the next few weeks. And we are already working on it. We have several of the leaders sitting at the table that are working on those as we speak. And there's evolving information, particularly in terms of quarantines, that we want to really pay attention to and get the implementation details correct as that information evolves. So I think with all that in mind, I still bring this recommendation to you and ask for your consideration and approval, and I'm open to any questions the board might have.
Thank you, Sandy. Thank you, Jake. And thank you to the entire lead team of 287, because I know, well, I can only imagine. I've been on the phone a lot with Sandy, just getting the background, and I know that many of you are putting in incredible hours to get the best information and to consider this from multiple points of view. So I welcome board questions and comments. Sam.
How will breakfast and lunch hours be handled with regard of, taking off masks to eat?
How will, say that again?
Breakfast and lunch, mealtime.
Oh, okay. Well, that's part of kind of some of those implementation details. But May or Elizabeth, do you want to reference those questions?
So we're working with the principals right now to establish how they're going to do their meal times for the school year. There is always the option for staff to bring a meal back to the classroom for students. We always have that option on the school site. But as of now, the health inspectors have stated that students may come to the office and get their meals, and we will do all the spacing things that we would like.
Will spacing be at 6 feet or is it now the required 3 feet?
Want me to respond to that? Yeah. Ultimately, the recommendation from MDH at this point in time is 3 feet in the classroom and 6 feet for adults, 3 feet for the students, 6 feet for the adults. However, not to exclude a student from the classroom. So really what they're saying is create as much space as you possibly can within your classroom, but 3 feet is the goal and 6 feet for adults. Now, when it comes to lunchroom, I would say the same thing would apply as what was in place last year. If you're removing your mask, spacing is going to become a lot more important for you, and keeping with the same people that you're around kind of all day, that cohorting situation.
So I just would encourage both board members and leaders with the masks and this new room situation. If you can make sure the microphone is in front of you when you speak, that will help make it be a little more clear to everyone. Thank you.
Other questions? Shannon and then Andrea.
I had a couple of questions. One, I think might be a work in progress, but I'm wondering about those staff who elect to get tested. Are we going to have tests available for them so that will the district have the testing available, or do they have to do it on their own privately?
Jake, do you want to try?
Yeah, absolutely. We've looked into multiple options at this point. We have narrowed it down to where we would do the testing on site during work hours, and make that test available to them. A lot more logistics around obviously keeping that information private.
Thank you. I'm also wondering if there are students and families who choose not to mask. What alternatives do we have for those families who choose not to comply with the masking policy?
Thank you. And that actually is something we had quite a bit of practice with last year. And from a special education standpoint, we have run those through our IEP meetings to have a team discussion about which students are simply unable based on their disability to wear a mask. So we're very cognizant of the fact that we will have students in our buildings that cannot and will not wear a mask. And that's part of the vulnerability, I think, of our population of students, because there are a number of students that would fall into that category. If they're not on an IEP, then we can require that students wear a mask as well. But there also may be students who have different eligibility to not wear a mask based on health considerations as well.
Do we have alternatives set up for those students, or is that just part of an individualized process through the IEP?
It's an individualized process. And our staff are very good at knowing our students. And I'm sure Melissa and Elizabeth would attest to the fact that staff were successful in many cases in teaching and learning, teaching our students on how to wear a mask and keep it on. So that was part of the process last year. And students did make some progress in that.
And one last question, I'm wondering if a resolution from the board to empower the superintendent to handle the any pivots or ways in which this plan might change as we get new information coming in and we see how things are playing out during the school year? Would that be something that would be helpful for the district and something that we as a board should consider?
Yeah, thank you. And that was certainly part of what we operated under last year. I'm going to ask Ann Becker to comment on why we chose this particular route of a resolution to signal intent and policies to follow. Ann?
Thank you, Superintendent Lewandowski. We are operating under policies this time around because we don't have the emergency orders or the mandates that were in place in last year, the last year and a half. And policies with their discretionary decision-making and weighing of various policy considerations are entitled to greater protection, or I should say are entitled to immunity protections that other things such as procedures would not be. As for a resolution for the superintendent to be able to make decisions similar to the one we had last year, I think that would be very helpful.
Thank you. Jake, did you have additional information to add on these most recent questions?
Yeah, I was just gonna add, for a secondary option for students that can't wear a mask, we do have face shields still. So if that's something that's more suitable for them, we do have that option for protection to keep that other safety layer in place.
Thank you. Andrea?
My question has been answered. Thank you.
Oh, fantastic. Additional questions and comments?
I
Ann?
think I want to follow up on Shannon's question, and that is, I guess, could we just, for the board members and anyone else who's watching, can we talk about just what the technical intent of this resolution is? Because the resolution is not to say that these are the policies. The resolution, as far as I'm reading it, is that the board is going to consider emergency adoption of these policies at our next regular meeting.
Correct.
So I just want to make sure that everyone is on the same page, that that's what was in front of us right now.
Yeah, Ann, do you
Yes.
want to respond, please, and then I'll follow up?
Sure. The reason for the resolution tonight is that we still are in need of more specific information in order to formulate the policies themselves. So we're not able to bring them to you tonight, but we do need to provide notice to staff and families and visitors that these are the measures that the board is considering based on the recommendation from administration.
So again, we're signaling our collective communities that this is something that, if approved tonight, we're going to bring specificity to in the policies in a couple of weeks.
That's a really good question. And I had the same kind of question. Is there anybody else who would like further clarification on the order in which we're moving things forward? The resolution this afternoon, and then policies to be approved later in the month. Jackie?
I have a question just about the policies. Is this something that would be a permanent policy, or is it a
Great.
under COVID conditions policy? I'm just,
Oh, that's a great question. We've entertained that ourselves, obviously, because things are changing.
right.
So I think the board could expect that we would bring back policies with changes in them as we see trends changing. Ideally, we wouldn't need to have some of these policies for the entire year. As I listen to the experts, to the CDC, and even Dr. Osterholm, the prediction is to be like this year. And we don't know the timing or the impact of that kind of a roller coaster, if you will. So there is the likelihood that some of these could change based on the changing conditions and trends that we see with COVID.
So does that mean we may be looking at voting on additions or changes or
In the future,
or
during the,
sunsetting it or those kinds of things?
yes, it does mean that.
Other questions or comments? Okay.
Sorry.
Oh, no, absolutely. Please.
So the mask recommendation here going towards policy is in line with CDC recommendations. We don't have any, speaking to what Jackie was just saying, is we don't have any recommendation as to what number flows us in or out. Is there any indication that any guidance like that will come, that there will be any?
Actually, I was just put my finger on some today where I believe it was from the CDC of a scale of, I believe, 1 to 5, that would kind of scale it back to if rates got more moderate, that would signal perhaps going to a different level of masking. But that actually was new information today. And I think that's part of the challenge, obviously, is a lot of this information is surfacing as the conditions in the country have changed very quickly here. But that actually caught my eye because it would do what you are asking about. It would give us a number at least, and we'll look into that more.
Sam and then Shannon.
And brought up another question for me then when asking that. We're able to gather information then from staff and students as far as vaccinations or who has been vaccinated or who will be, or does that violate HIPAA?
That's a great question because just a number of days ago, we were asking ourselves, and I'm going to have Jake answer that question first.
Can you re-ask the question for me, please?
Are we able to gather information as a district from staff and students of who's already vaccinated or who will be vaccinated throughout the year? Or would that violate HIPAA?
No, it doesn't violate HIPAA depending on who's asking for the information. All licensed school nurses can go into a statewide database and see who's vaccinated and who's not. In our situation, we were able to identify a percentage by using our staff employment list, working with Hennepin Health to obtain, just tell us what percentage of our staff were vaccinated. So by not releasing any names, that's not violating HIPAA from my understanding. And they shared that with us.
And what we found is that approximately 80% of our staff are vaccinated, which is a really good rate. It still leaves us with approximately 20% or about 170 some staff that are not vaccinated. And our efforts would be, as if the board approves this, that we would work as hard as we can to give information to staff, provide opportunities for vaccinations, and support them in ways that worked within their work day. So we want to, again, try to make it as supportive to our staff as possible. We recognize that some staff will simply not get the vaccination, and therefore we added the test weekly option, which presents a multitude of additional kinds of logistics to try to work through. But we feel that's fair and respects the decision-making of our staff. And we know that we have a variety of reasons why individuals may choose not to get the vaccination.
Shannon and then Michelle.
I just wanted to follow up on the question about the resolution empowering the superintendent to make these calls. I'm wondering, is that something that it would be helpful to add to this resolution, or is that going to be rolled into the policies as they're crafted? I'm just wondering what would be most helpful.
Yeah,
to create that flexibility to respond in the moment.
Right. I'm going to ask Ann to respond. This gets into legal territory of the wording that we use both in this resolution and policy-wise. So Ann.
I think it would be helpful to operate as we did last year, where there was a specific resolution that permitted the superintendent to make decisions as needed as things changed. And if that's something that the board were interested in, I could certainly bring a draft of a resolution like that to the next meeting.
So, and just to make sure the board understands, it would be in addition to this resolution, and it would pair with the policies, and it would be a resolution that recognizes the changing circumstances. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
And I appreciate the question And I hear it as an intent toward a more seamless operation of the school year. Is that accurate? It just allows a quicker response to what we know is going to be a changing climate. And is there any opposition to the board in having Ann draft that kind of language as an additional resolution? I believe it's a good idea. I also appreciate it. So Ann, thank you. I'm hearing or seeing nodding heads as approval to just, if you could please explore some language on an additional resolution that we can look at our August 26th meeting. We'd appreciate it.
My pleasure, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And thank you, Shannon. Michelle?
Just very quickly, are some teachers who aren't vaccinated eligible for the, I'll say, bonus money that the state put out? And maybe, I don't know if we push that as an incentive. Might be a little tricky, but
Yeah, no, they absolutely are, Michelle, able to get that through the 15th. So now whether that's extended or not, but today's deadline is it goes through the $100. I think it's a Visa card or some form of giving them $100, but it has to be, the vaccinations have to be done by the 15th. If they change it, that would be great and extend it. We also know that Hennepin Health, we've made some inquiries about for early to mid-September, getting a vaccination clinic at 2 of our sites, and they actually offer a $50 bonus as well. So there, if it is extended, I believe we can pair those together, or an individual who gets a vaccine could opt for that.
great, thank you.
Yeah.
Heidi?
I have a question about these requirements of staff. Is it going to be explicit in the direction to staff that their employment is predicated on their agreeing to these?
Excellent question. Anne?
That is certainly a decision that the board would make. I believe in our discussions, and someone correct me if I'm wrong, that we have arrived at the decision that this ought to be something that follows the progressive discipline process.
That's correct. In our discussion, it's important if we're going to have this kind of very tight guideline that we have a way to say to staff, if you do not follow this, then this, and this come after.
Ruthie?
Is this based on the order from the governor for all state government workers, or what is this based on?
Yeah, this is based on our legal research and the changing rates and our knowledge of our population of students and staff. It certainly was a piece of information when the governor ordered what he did yesterday. And my hunch would be is that we're going to see more either public or private kinds of organizations making similar mandates. But we are not doing this because he did that. In fact, this was in the works before he announced.
Already,
Yeah.
I understand. And based on the governor's order, there are 2 exceptions, religious reasons, or what's the other one?
Medical?
Medical, right.
And those would be in play for us as
And
well.
we have that covered already.
Yeah, and that's why we have the option to test. So if those individuals who had an exemption that fit those legal descriptions, then they would be able to go into that testing category weekly and show a negative test, or a positive test would certainly send us into more of a quarantine situation.
Andrea?
If they don't meet the legal exemptions and they just don't believe in vaccinations for personal reasons, other than the exemptions, can they make that choice and do the testing instead?
Yes.
Okay.
Sam?
Another question now. So now if a positive test comes back from an employee, how is that time off treated for them?
Anne?
We no longer have funding from the federal government to pay employees during that quarantine time. So they would be using their paid leave time.
And then I assume that would be required minimum of 10 calendar days, right? Or 10 working days that they'd be off.
As they're entitled to leave per their contract. Is that what you're asking?
No, I mean, because of COVID guidelines, they have to be, they have to be
long is the
home
quarantine?
minimum 10 days, right?
Not necessarily. That's part of the quarantine guidelines changing fairly rapidly and certainly different than last year. Jake?
Yeah, right now the CDC still has those three guidelines, right? 7 days, but you have to test within 3 to 5, the 10-day or the 14-day. And then again, the guidance is still coming out because there's so many different variables at this point. If someone's vaccinated, if they had COVID within the past 90 days, that will change the quarantine timeframe for that person. So really it's going to be off of an individual basis and situation or case.
Primarily based on vaccinated or unvaccinated.
Correct.
Okay.
I just would love a little bit of background on the racial and equity impact of the proposed resolution and any discussion that you may have had as a staff.
Yeah, actually a timely question because this is Thursday. Earlier this week, we had our all our leaders in one place, and we explained this to them, and Radius led them through that tool. So Radius, please.
Oh, I'm so excited and thank you for asking that question. I was sitting on pins and needles hoping that someone would bring it up. So thank you. On Tuesday, the instructional and operational leaders really dove into the racial equity impact analysis and applied it to this conversation you're having right now. And so what we believed is that the racial equity impact analysis or the decision was historical and that people of color not wanting to get vaccinated, putting the burden on BIPOC people based on fear in the past of medical trauma. Weekly testing, burdens on buildings and time away from doing student instruction to focus on the unvaccinated adult population. Leave because they test positive for staff who have fewer days, keeping money in their pockets to be vaccinated. Leadership, as you know, is very white in our district, and 2209 isn't as white. When it came to who will benefit and or be burdened by this decision, we talked about hopeful that students will benefit, many of whom are, as you know, students of color. Hope that families will benefit. This may be an option for our families to be vaccinated. Families keeping students in schools allows a parent caregiver in their job and not to take leave, which keeps money in their household. Colleagues felt it when the burden on colleagues when someone is out. Who is doing the testing? What will that look like? And the only people going to be tested are unvaccinated. The burden on nurses will be doing the testing. I wonder, do we as white staff have a knowledge and understanding and insight into what BIPOC staff might be grappling with in this decision and BIPOC families? Another is until data is disaggregated, we act with color blindness, right? The acting assumption is that the majority of unvaccinated people are BIPOC. That's an assumption that many of us are making. If you are unvaccinated, that means that you're in the wrong, being singled out regardless of race. And how will that affect them? And how will that affect our students? And who is keeping track of all of this? You know, and track of who has been vaccinated each week. And the strategies to mitigate any unintended consequences. Our discussion was, who do people actually trust? And where is the information coming from? Rather than a blast from the district service center, maybe having more personalized conversations with people that they actually have relationships with at the building sites. And how do we remove the stigma? We are all giving people a choice. Don't need to be vaccinated, but will do so. Not requiring vaccinations, but testing to assure that if there is someone with the virus, they are not passing it along. And then lastly, not indicting someone for not being vaccinated, but protesting students for the need to be in school. So we spent a lot of time taking a look at where we perceived ourselves to be on the compass and where we perceive others to be on the compass. And, the role of whiteness and race and what did that play, and how did we perceive that in the room? We really did have a very robust conversation. We got a chance to get in our feelings and to listen and learn. So it was a really great conversation. And I do thank you for asking the question.
I'm grateful for the background. Thank you. I'm just continuing to learn a lot, and I know struggling, as we all are, it is emotional. The topic becomes emotional. And we go to a lot of conclusions. So I really appreciate the background. Thank you. Ruthie.
I just wonder, Radius, you had mentioned, who did you meet with? I missed that.
Yes,
The group that you met with.
Thank you for asking the question. It was approximately 50 or so of our instructional and operational leaders across the district. And there was depth and breadth across the organization in that all buildings, many departments were represented in that conversation. There was role diversity as well as race, gender diversity represented in the room for that conversation. We spent about 20 good minutes, 25 minutes, having that conversation. We also took a look at, are we responding from a white leader perspective, leaping to a decision too quickly? That was a conversation that we had, focusing on the 20% and are we moving too fast? We wrestle with our preparedness for our students returning to school who have been deeply impacted over the past year. Prepare for the usual and layer on the implementation of this in a way that is sensitive, protects privacy, is efficient, and makes sense. So again, thank you for asking the question.
Thank you. Have we had any sessions with the families and community members from BIPOC communities
We have,
regarding these issues?
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I apologize.
That's okay.
Um, What we have done is we've communicated with the families. This is the time of the year, and the Delta variant is coming to us at an inconvenient time in two ways. We don't have ready access. We don't have staff to do that. And that timeline toward the start of school is creeping up. Fortunately, we have an extra long time before school starts because of the way the school year calendar was planned for this year. So no, we have not had engagement sessions with families because of those reasons. But they have had communication sent to them, and they would actually, both staff, depending on well, either way, the decision by the board tonight will be communicated to both families and staff following this meeting.
I think that's a great idea about the data. Who's keeping track of all of these different questions that you're asking, especially the percentage of the staffing, how many are unvaccinated, and how many represent BIPOC communities? That kind of data would be helpful in making future decisions.
And I'm sure everyone in the room is aware that our BIPOC populations have been disproportionately impacted by the COVID virus thus far, and early signs of that continuing with this Delta variant.
Thank you.
Is there any additional information board members would like before we take the resolution vote? We have had a motion and we've had a second and we've had discussion. So at this time, I'd like to call the question and do the roll call vote. So we will be voting to approve the COVID-19 safety guidelines resolution for the 2021-2022 school year. And thank you, Andrea, for taking the roll call vote.
Shannon Andreessen. Crystal Brackey is absent. Ann Casey,
Aye.
Andrea Keen, yes. Ruthie Dallas,
Yes.
Michelle Kuntz,
Aye.
Heidi Marty,
Aye.
Jackie Mosqueda Jones,
Aye.
Regina Neville,
Aye.
Sam Sant.
Yes.
Adam Seidel is absent. The resolution passes unanimously.
Thank you. I want to thank Superintendent Lewandowski. Thank you, Jake. Thank you, all of the team, because I know you were intentional and thorough in getting as much a background as is available at this time to make a difficult decision. And I believe that this is the most prudent recommendation for our body of students. So thank you very much.
And likewise, Madam Chair, I appreciate the very genuine questions that were asked tonight by board members and your support for this resolution. We'll get to work on the policies. In fact, I think Ann's already probably got some drafts as
Okay.
potential documents to work on in the next 2 weeks.
Excellent. So for the agenda, there's no AMSD report. There is planning calendar information available online. Is there any other business or once around the table items that anyone would like to share? I know that we're coming into school board election season for many of our districts, so I'd just like to wish you all well. I know many of us are up for reelection at our home districts or have expiring terms for District 287. So we'll, we'll follow this as we go into the fall, but I just wish all of you well as we move into this season. Sandy, any final words before we move for adjournment?
No, I don't have anything additional. Thank you.
All right. Once again, thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon. Is there a motion to adjourn? Moved by Heidi Marty. Is there a second? Seconded by Michelle Coons. All those in favor of adjournment, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.